Hey everyone, this is Collin Campbell, the Investor Success Manager here at Freaky Fast Investments, hosting Brick by Brick, our podcast focusing on building generational wealth through single-family homes. Jason is traveling, and so this week I get the opportunity to go solo and host the podcast myself. So I got the opportunity to choose the topic. And I speak to a lot of investors, right? Every week I'm on the phone hearing what are their concerns, what are their goals, and I wanted to share a topic that's come up a lot with investors recently, which is essentially risk mitigation strategies and downside protection strategies. Here's what I mean by that, right? Most investment companies out there are going to share with you their investment projections, what they're hoping to achieve within their investment funds, right? We're no different, right? We talk about all the time how we're aiming for 16% returns in our debt fund, how we're aiming for a 2x equity multiple in our asset fund. And in many ways, we're achieving these goals for our investors. But here's the thing that a lot of investment companies are not going to talk to you about. It's risk, but it's the number one thing that investors are thinking about whenever they're considering an investment. The number one question, even if they don't ask it to somebody, is how can you lose my money? And that's the question you should be asking every person you trust with an investment. And so today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to discuss the three main ways that we could lose your money here at Freaky Fast Investments. I know that sounds incredibly counterintuitive, but I want all of our investors who invest with Freaky Fast Investments to come in with eyes wide open to the risks, while at the same time recognizing that we've got some great strategies in place to be able to mitigate that risk and still provide consistent risk-adjusted returns for our investors. All right, so let's dive in. The number one way that we can lose your money here at Freaky Fast Investments is through construction delays. A huge part of what we do here at Freaky Fast Investments is we are renovating homes. That renovation process, if you've ever done it or watched Chip and Joanna Gaines, is you've seen it can be a tough process, right? And oftentimes you come up against delays. We oftentimes project 6 months for our construction process, but sometimes it takes longer than that. You've got issues with your contractors that you're using, or things come up outside of your control that cause a delay in that construction process. And so that's a hindrance to providing exceptional returns to our investors. How do we mitigate against that risk for you as an investor? The number one way that we do that is that we have an in-house general contractor. And I know that seems like a silly thing to be able to say, but having an in-house general contractor helps us mitigate risk. And the reason that is because if you've ever worked with a contractor before, you'll know that that contractor's main job is to make money, right? When they want to make money, they will nickel and dime you, and they will take their time to be able to complete that process. Here's the thing, though. Our contractors that we work with in-house are not people who are working on a commission basis. They're salaried employees. What that means is that they are incentivized to be able to work on our projects alone, and to be able to keep them within budget constraints and to be able to get them done on time. So having in-house general contractors mitigates risk. The second way that we mitigate that risk is actually something that, again, would seem counterintuitive to you at first, is we charge ourselves late fees. So if you're an investor in our debt fund, whenever we are creating construction loans or bridge debt loans within that fund, we charge a flat interest rate of 12% plus a 2% origination fee. on those loans. Now, if we exceed the timeline for that loan, again, typically 6 months in length, we charge ourselves an additional percentage in terms of the interest on that loan. So a 12% loan now costs us 13% because of those late fees in that process. Now, how does that help mitigate risk? Obviously, for us as an investment operator, that incentivizes us to complete our construction on time, and it incentivizes us because obviously our money, our profit that we earn as a company is bound up in the completion of that project. And so by putting late fees on that, it incentivizes us as investment managers to complete it on time and to help secure your investment. So those are the ways that we are mitigating risks for delays in construction. The second major risk for you as an investor with our funds is natural disasters, right? This comes up a lot whenever it comes to coastal cities or perhaps investments in Tornado Alley or something along those lines. Thankfully, we don't have a ton of our single-family homes in coastal cities. We do have a handful in Florida. But here's the thing. Whenever those natural disasters occur, and they do occur, they do affect homes, we have risk mitigation strategies in place. Number one being that we maintain insurance policies on every single one of our homes, even during the renovation process. So you can get special insurance policies for a home that is under renovation, providing additional ways that we are protecting and preserving your capital that you've invested with Freaky Fast during that time. We work with a national insurance broker to be able to get individualized rates and quotes on each individual home whenever they come into our portfolio, making sure that if that home is at risk in a flood zone, that we've got flood coverage, that if that home is at risk for high wind damage, that we've got high wind damage coverage on that home. And that is how we are mitigating that risk in the case of natural disasters and preserving your capital in the case of something disastrous happening along those lines. Now, third and finally, the final risk that you have as an investor investing with Freaky Fast Capital is rent collection, right? This is primarily as it comes to our asset fund, whenever it comes to the cash-on-cash returns that we provide to our investors on a monthly basis, right? In this fund, we're targeting 8 to 10% annualized returns paid out monthly through our rental income, right? The biggest inhibitor to that is delinquent renters, right? Renters who will not pay their rent. This is a huge concern. It was a very huge concern during COVID that a lot of property management companies went through. Here's how we are mitigating that risk for our investors. Number one is that we have an in-house property management team. Again, this shows you how what most people would describe as a vertical integration helps minimize the risk of your investment, right? So a lot of folks will hire a third-party property manager to be able to manage their properties. Unfortunately, yes, those property managers may get a fee from you in return for managing your properties, but they don't have the same skin in the game as an in-house property management company does, right? Because that in-house property management company will not get paid unless they collect that rent. And so, as a result, our in-house property management team is incredibly motivated to be able to collect that rent no matter what the case is. And so we've got an incredible team led by Shauna and Logan who help collect rent for us. They work out payment plans whenever we have residents who are delinquent. That happens. But we work with those residents to be able to make sure that they are set up for success and paying their rent to us, and we're ultimately paying out consistent returns to you, the investor. And the second thing that I'll mention about this in ways we are mitigating risk is our asset management team, right? So Shauna, as I mentioned, helps lead that department, and she's our primary asset manager. Most people don't know how to differentiate between an asset manager and a property manager. A property manager helps deal with the day-to-day tasks of property management, speaking with residents, collecting rent, doing maintenance requests whenever those come in from our residents. They're working more on those day-to-day tasks, managing the tenants and to the properties. Whereas an asset manager, the best way that I've heard it put is that they are the watchdog of the investment, right? They are primarily looking at investment metrics to make sure that the properties are performing the way that we projected them to perform. And so, again, while they may end up working with tenant issues here or there, their primary job is to look at the numbers and to ensure that the property management is creating an actual great investment for our investors. And so we have an in-house asset manager, Shauna, who helps oversee that, who's overseen, again, by Colin Rich, our incredible chief operating officer and chief of staff. So those are a few ways that we're mitigating risks for our investors. And what I would share with you, just as your friend, as someone who's been around the private real estate investing world for a while, is I would give you the idea of whenever you are evaluating a investment manager or somebody who you want to invest your funds with, you need to be able to ask them the hard questions. You need to be able to ask them, how can you lose my money? If they don't know how to answer that question, then they are not truly looking out for the preservation of your capital. And then you need to ask them, how are you protecting me against those risks that you just described to me? You, as an investor, must look not only at the upside potential of an investment, but you must look at the downside potential as well. This is what caught a lot of investors with their pants down, unfortunately, from 2020 to 2022, was they all looked at shiny projections for their investments. They saw 20, 30, 40% IRRs projected on these projects. And during that time, a lot of folks were hitting those IRRs. Here's the thing, though, that most people were not asking the question of. They were not asking the question of what would go wrong within this investment in order for me to lose money and for things to go wrong. Obviously, the variables that occurred within those investments primarily was interest rate hikes. Many of those multifamily properties, that those investors invested in had floating rate variable debt. So whenever an interest rate hike occurred, their investment went underwater. That's what has led to a large amount of investments going underwater today and a lot of distress within the multifamily space. And so again, ask those hard questions of your investment manager. Make sure that you understand not only the upside potential and how things could go well, but the downside potential as well. This has been another episode of Brick by Brick. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time.